Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Braden Fox, who is a firefighter for the City of Toronto in Canada. He's been doing that for almost 5 years now, and before that, he spent 6 years as a volunteer firefighter on Easter Island. And we're going to talk today about a little bit about what it's like to be a firefighter in terms of the physical demands and how he's also Braden is also a student of the Alexander Technique and how how the technique has helped him in his work life. Braden, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robert. Good morning.
Well, good morning. It's good talking to you on Skype. Braden is a student of mine, and I've seen him many times, but we never talked on Skype before. Um, Braden, could you give our listeners your short description or definition of the Alexander technique?
Um, yeah, I'll do my best. It's a question that has come up before, and I found surprisingly difficult to answer. But the simplest way that I can put it to friends and colleagues when they ask, "What is this Alexander technique that you've been practicing or trying out?" is a method of using your own mind with some assistance from your Alexander technique teacher to to use your body in a more harmonious or simple fashion, or as you've told me, sort of Alexander's uh, famous quote, if you will, that you need to get out of your own way. So when I try to explain it to my friends, I tell them that it's a matter of learning how to subtly use ideas, maybe in your subconscious mind, and turning those into a physical change in your
Oh,
everyday life.
right. Okay, that's good. And I'd like to begin our main part of our interview with a little description by you on what it's like to be a firefighter. I know that from an email you sent me just day before this interview that you had just finished a 36-hour shift, and I assume that's a fairly normal shift for you.
It The 36-hour tours are less common,
So
but
more like 24-hour
yeah,
shift.
in the city of Toronto and many other large municipalities in North America, to the best of my knowledge, use a 24-hour shift system,
Hmm.
just
But
by virtue of the fact that they want constant staffing. They expect the same number of firefighters staffing fire stations and fire trucks 24/7 every
hmm
day of the year. And
right.
there is no easy way to spread that manpower out and have that staffing remain the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And maybe you could just say a little bit about what you have to do when there's a call into the station that for you to go to a fire. What do you have to do yourself at that point?
Well, obviously, just like in a movie or TV show, you can see what happens initially is that there's a very loud alarm that actually sounds throughout the station,
Mm-hmm.
alerting all the firefighters who work there that there's an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And that alarm is typically followed by a brief description from the dispatch. So our communication center will then describe very briefly and sometimes very inaccurately, based on the caller's reports,
Mm-hmm.
what type of emergency you're responding to.
Mm-hmm.
So they may give you the address followed by, reports of a fire or just alarms
Mm-hmm.
or a medical emergency of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the position you're riding on the truck, we rotate through who drives the apparatus as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm driving the vehicle, the first stop is the floor watch room where you acknowledge the emergency dispatch.
Mm-hmm.
You receive paperwork from a printout confirming the address and the nature of the emergency. And then you double check the map to make absolutely certain you know exactly where you're going
Mm-hmm.
before you board the truck. Because as a driver, that's solely your responsibility to get the crew to the scene.
Right.
If you're riding on the back of the truck, which is where I spend about two-thirds or three-quarters of my shifts as a junior firefighter, you get to the back of the truck as quickly as possible, and you put on all of your equipment.
And that equipment's pretty heavy and bulky, right?
Uh, Fairly, yes. It's by nature designed to protect you as best as possible from extremely adverse conditions and
Right,
high heat.
right.
So it has to be quite thick, and it's a three-layered system that we use on our suits. So
Hmm.
you're wearing steel toe and shank boots, three-layered bunker pants, as they're called, your
Hmm.
turnout gear or bunker gear, your coat, and then an assembly of tools such as radio, flashlight, whatever other small tools each firefighter carries individually, your gloves, your helmet, and then, of course, your SCBA, your self-contained breathing apparatus, the air pack that you see firefighters wearing.
Right. And what does all that weigh, roughly?
I believe the general equipment that we just described is in or around 80 pounds. It depends a little bit on the models, of course, and principally the size of the air cylinders that the department uses. We've
Hmm.
recently moved up to a slightly larger size cylinder,
Hmm.
carry more air to stay inside a fire longer.
Hmm.
So between 80 and 100 pounds, but that does not include the hand tools or the hose that you're required to carry once you arrive on scene,
Right.
which could easily add another 40 to 60 pounds.
So that's a lot of weight and a lot of layers of clothing. And even if the way you've described it to me, we've talked during lessons, you might not, when you get to the fire scene, you might be someone who's assigned to sort of be ready to go into the building or kind of be in a perimeter around the fire. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very common that you end up either staging, as they call it,
Mm-hmm.
which is where the initial crews may have made entry into the structure.
Mm-hmm.
They may be fighting the fire or conducting ventilation, search and rescue.
Mm-hmm.
And the additional crews that are, as of yet, perhaps not needed,
Mm-hmm.
or they're waiting to go in and replace the first arriving crews when their air runs out,
Right.
you are staging. So you are quite literally standing around
You're
very nearby the structure
right.
and
So,
with
but
all that equipment on and you're ready to go
well,
at a
that's what
moment's
I wanted
notice.
to mention. I mean, you're standing around, but you are carrying a very heavy weight, and Toronto has some pretty hot summers and some pretty cold winters, right?
Indeed.
And I could imagine it's hard to know which would be better in that situation. Um, you could be sweltering in there, right, in that outfit,
Yeah.
and or you could be, well, I guess you wouldn't be freezing, but it'd be pretty cold. So
The key in the winter is to get into the fire. As the senior veteran firefighters would tell you, it's always better to be inside in the winter because once you're wet, it's very, very difficult to get warm again.
right, or it could be raining really hard, right? That's the other
Absolutely.
another issue. So I guess the point I wanted to make is that even if you're not doing the dramatic, classic movie scene of climbing a ladder and pulling babies out kind of thing, even uh, the sort of relatively serene being ready part is not all that easy. And not, it's pretty challenging in terms of just doing that, right?
It can be, and
Okay.
as you noted, particularly depending on the weather.
Right. So, and of course, there are times when you have to climb ladders and expose yourself to quite a bit of danger and maneuver around. I assume in situations where you can't always see things very well, you're not exactly sure what you're getting into, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the standard, I would say, in a structure fire, that is
Hmm.
to say, if you've entered a home or even an apartment, is the expectation is that there is zero visibility in the truest sense. That
Right.
the smoke normally, if a fire has been well involved, if it has grown to any appreciable extent, is it's complete blackout conditions. You may as well have your eyes closed when you go in. So,
Hmm.
contrary to what you may see in media portrayals of what firefighting looks like, the reality is that 95% of the time we're actually crawling on our hands and knees, and you're doing everything through touch and
Oh,
hearing.
right. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you're padding around looking for victims or windows or anything else, or fire for that matter.
Right. And at some point, you may have to actually carry someone down a ladder, right?
it's a possibility.
which
Absolutely.
is could be another 100, 150, 200 pounds on top of all your other equipment.
Yeah,
So I guess what I'm getting at here is that the physical demands are really quite daunting, and especially combined with the 24-hour shift situation where you might be, almost a day into the work, and then suddenly you have a fire and have to do all these things, having kind of been on the go for a good part of that previous almost day-long period.
potentially, yes.
Potentially, yeah.
And it certainly seems that the vast majority of serious fires that we participate in certainly do seem to happen in those 20 something hour, just by nature of fire. And
Right,
they
right.
go undetected and they tend to grow larger and they tend to go unnoticed for longer periods of time in the middle of the night.
Mhm.
So we shift change at about 6 in the morning.
Mhm.
So I would say many of those serious bad fires happen between the hours of midnight and 5 or 6 in the morning.
When you've been up for almost a
For
day. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
right. So, just for our listeners, I mean, I can attest to the fact that Braden is a pretty strong, big guy. He's and but with all even with all that strength, I think you had some issues around just physical issues around doing the work that the Alexander technique has helped with. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. I have
And maybe you could say a bit about what are some specific examples of how really this very subtle technique has helped you do these quite you know heavy duty physical actions more efficiently.
I think that one of the most important things that it's helped me with, like I've hurt myself a couple of times at work, not too seriously, thankfully,
Hmm.
compared to many other injuries that coworkers have sustained, but falling down a staircase in a fire or tweaking a muscle trying to extract a patient from a very inconvenient location, a very
Right.
difficult access area. But
And with no light, right? Or very
yeah,
very little or no light. Yeah. Hmm.
but sort of the nagging injuries or pain that I've had, discomfort in my back, I've definitely found a big, big improvement, particularly since beginning the Alexander Technique lessons on a regular basis and
Hmm.
trying to practice some of the homework, as my brother has called it, the constructive rest at home,
Hmm.
is that during those periods, which make up the bulk of the time, that are a little bit more mundane, for example, riding in the truck, whether it's
Hmm.
on the way to or from an emergency
Hmm.
or training or anything else for that matter, or even something as simple as climbing the staircase in the fire hall,
Hmm.
is I found that I suppose I've relieved a lot of the tension or the extra work that my body was doing that was aggravating that pain or that injury, so
Hmm.
that something as simple as sitting in a seat,
Hmm.
maybe not the most ergonomic or best set up seat in a fire truck, is that it's more comfortable because I'm not doing it in a way that's exacerbating a problem I already have.
Right. And how about the actual more dramatic stuff like climbing a ladder or crawling around in the dark and the smoke and stuff like that? Have you found that the technique has helped you with that as well?
It, to be completely honest, it's hard to say because as you can imagine, in the heat of the moment, so to
Uh-huh.
say,
Yeah.
it's you're intensely focused on what you're doing, and I'm
Hmm.
certainly not actively thinking about anything else, including
Hmm.
the Alexander technique. But the only evidence I'd have to support the fact that it is indeed helping me, in every aspect, including during emergency situations, is that I don't have nearly the pain or discomfort that I did even, 1 or 2 years ago.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and I had tried other methods, between physiotherapy and RMT and Cairo and
Hmm.
several different routes that I'd taken that did help short term, but they didn't seem to be addressing the root cause or the fundamental issue,
Hmm.
which I believe is sort of how I was using my body in the first place.
Right. So when you're right in the heat of the action, so to speak, you've got to be totally focused on your environment, on what the situation you're in is. And it would be a bit much, I think, to expect someone to
Use a direction.
carve out. I mean, in theory, I'm sure it's possible in theory, but um, I think that's really understandable. So the main benefits, or the main times that you use the work consciously, would be these less dramatic moments, riding in the truck or waiting, as potentially to go into a fire, or as you say, climbing stairs in the firehouse. And I think I should mention that in addition, firefighters don't just fight fires or go to fires. They, among other things they need to do during these long shifts, is they have to do all the cooking and all the cleaning in the firehouse. Right? You don't have maids that come in and clean the toilets, right?
That's right. It's
You guys do it.
typically the junior firefighter's assignment.
Right.
But yeah, there's a very organized and disciplined schedule that everything revolves around
Right.
inside the fire station, and that definitely includes the cooking, cleaning, and every other necessary part of a regular day. Anything you can imagine that you would do during a 24-hour period of your life basically
Hmm.
takes place as well inside a fire hall, just
Right.
within the confines of those four walls, and of course within the restrictions of absolutely anything could be dropped at a moment's notice when we have an alarm.
Right.
So
And
everything is
yeah,
perpetually interrupted, but it's nonetheless a very organized and good system. It
yeah.
works surprisingly well.
And I don't know whether this is true in Toronto, but here in Lincoln, Nebraska, I've occasionally seen firefighters at the supermarket buying the food for the house. Do you guys go out shopping, or how does the food actually get there?
Yeah, we do. It's
Uh-huh.
often a contentious topic because there's some misperceptions, I think, perhaps in the public eye that if you see firefighters out shopping, that they are, for some reason, unavailable to attend other emergencies or that they're taking themselves out of service, as we would call it, to do something else. But the fact is, during that period of 24 hours, we are always in service and always available. And we do go and shop. We divide those duties among the different trucks and firefighters in the station. But
Hmm.
early in the morning, there is always a shopping run that is done. And the firefighters who walk into the grocery store, they have their radios on. They've
Hmm.
informed the communications board that they are available in district on air. So we're always within our first run area. And we do often get calls while we're out, whether it's en route to training or to the grocery store or on our way back from a call. The radio is always available, so we're
Hmm.
then dispatched from wherever we happen to be, and often we're actually closer to the emergency than we would have been had we actually been sitting in our station waiting for the call. But
Right. Right.
shopping is an important part of it, and as is cooking and eating in the fire hall.
Right. So I guess the point I want to make is that these 24-hour shifts, you're never off duty,
Correct.
or a 36-hour shift, you're never off duty.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, for someone like me likes their after lunch naps and you know get plenty of sleep on a regular basis, that would be a very challenging thing to deal with just on its own, apart from all of the physical demands of the job.
Yeah.
So,
I often think that one of the most difficult things that the firefighters actually try to deal with through their career, depending greatly on, how busy the company you work at is sleep deprivation because it's
mm-hmm.
sort of an ever constant thing. And don't get me wrong, I think that the schedule is in a way as good as it possibly can be, and we are given ample periods of rest in between stretches of busy shifts so that the firefighter and your body can recover.
Mm-hmm.
And it's by no means a complaint on my part, but it is definitely one of the challenges that I think all firefighters and all shift workers, for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
especially including police officers and paramedics, they're all dealing with to a certain extent is the fact that you're you're forcing yourself to be awake during times that the human body is very likely not designed or evolved to be awake and to be functioning at.
And do you feel that what you've learned with the Alexander technique has helped you deal with that a little better than you might otherwise? Do you have any sense of that?
Um, I think so, yeah. I mentioned to you before that when lying down to go to sleep, I am actually using often directions in
Hmm.
bed, when I'm in a
Right,
horizontal position, and
right.
it helps to relax my body and prepare me for sleep. So I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt to be going to sleep without that pain and discomfort in your back,
Oh,
which was
yeah.
a barrier to rest before, for sure.
Right, right. So is there anything else that you'd like to add? We're kind of running out of time, but is there anything you haven't mentioned that you would like to say before we stop?
Yes, a couple of things, if you don't mind,
Sure.
actually.
Yeah.
The first one is I don't believe I ever actually answered your first question, which is what is it like being a firefighter?
Yeah.
And I could tell you off the top of my head, it's probably the most rewarding career that I ever could have imagined. It was a childhood dream come true, and it really is an honor and a pleasure to serve the community that I grew up in. So
Uh-huh.
that's the short answer to what it's like being a firefighter.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It's an absolute pleasure, and it's a job that I hold tremendous respect for, and I feel really, really grateful to have the opportunity. And the second thing doesn't really have anything to do with our interview per se, but I feel that I can't help but mention it. It being September 11th today,
Mm.
it's an important anniversary for firefighters and many other people alike. And I just wanted to take a really brief moment to reflect and remember what happened 16 years ago and the tremendous work that the Fire Department of New York did on that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I remember being in Toronto shortly after September 11th, and I noticed that all the fire trucks were flying a little American flags on them.
Yeah,
Do you
it,
you probably weren't there then. That was you. That was
I
before you were.
I was living in Toronto, but I
Right.
was I was
Yeah.
pretty young. I believe I was 17 actually.
Right.
So
But you
I
remember
wasn't.
that as well. They all had little American flags on
I
their
do, I do,
trucks.
yeah.
Yeah.
And even
So,
to this day, at some fire halls as far
mhm.
away as Toronto,
Mhm.
you'll often find small vases of flowers and tokens of appreciation that people leave on the anniversary, which
Right.
means a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Braden, thank you so much for doing this interview. My guest has been Braden Fox, a firefighter in the city of Toronto, Canada. He's been doing that for almost 5 years. And before that, he spent 6 years as a volunteer firefighter on Easter Island. Braden, thank you so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Robert.